Hi everyone. So I want to guide you through the peer review worksheet for Project 2 and just highlight a few of the commonly missed or misunderstood questions on this worksheet. So number 2, where we are asking about audience. Remember that you may not be the target audience for the paper. Again, as we are writing towards local community issues, you may not be a part of that community. So what can be really helpful, and this is a lot of what Professor Tingle and I do, is we really try to put ourselves in the shoes of the person or the people to whom the author is writing. So that way we can identify areas that, if we were the intended audience, where we may have had additional questions, comments, concerns. So again, if they aren't writing to you, or you may not be familiar with the issue, the community, some of the language, things like that, that doesn't really matter. What you really want to try and do is embody the person or the people to whom the author is writing, so that way that will really define what your feedback should encompass. This third question, does the writer clearly identify the problem and demonstrate a need for change in the introduction? So a lot of students, between Project 1 and Project 2 really struggle with how do I summarize, everything that I wrote about in Project 1 and Project 2 for my audience. Sometimes the audience may be the same from Project 1 to Project 2. Sometimes it's a different audience. So one of the things to really think about is, for you as a reader, pretending that you are that intended audience, were you able to get enough background information about why the issue is important without feeling overwhelmed by that information? One of the things that a lot of students will do is they'll include, a hyperlink to their Project 1, depending on, what type of genre they are imagining these projects being published in. So a lot of times that can help too, but really we really want to make sure that students are able to very clearly and succinctly summarize the information they covered in Project 1 as they introduce the proposal for Project 2. Number 4, what is the problem? So the reason that we ask you, in a lot of these peer reviews, to restate certain elements that may seem obvious is it's just a great way to let the author know whether or not they clearly communicated their ideas to the audience. So although, again, it may seem pretty obvious, what the problem is and if it's believable, having you restate it will let the author know whether or not they were clear in communicating exactly what they wanted to that intended audience and to their readers. So question 5 asks about, does the essay propose workable, realistic, well thought out solutions, and what are some solutions the author hasn't considered? The second part is where a lot of students really struggle, saying, oh, well, I don't really know of any other solutions. I'm not part of that community. I don't really know the issue very well. So again, what I really encourage you to do is to put yourself in the shoes of the intended audience and really think about, if you were the person to whom they were writing, what other ideas might you have that the author hasn't considered? Another thing that can be helpful is to think about a similar type of issue with which you are familiar. So let's say someone's writing about the lack of technology in the United States Navy, which is a real example from this semester. You may have zero background in the armed forces like me and Professor Tingle, but at the same time, what you want to do is think about what other experiences do you have, with a lack of technology, or, being around people who don't understand or have access to technology, and how could you then use that sort of information in order to provide the sort of solutions that we're asking for in question 5. Same thing with number 7, thinking about how the discussion of the most feasible solution could be expanded upon. Again, try to put yourselves in the shoes of the intended audience, or think about a similar type of issue with which you have some experience, and that should help spawn some ideas about how the author might expand upon their most feasible solution. On number 10, as we're talking about APA and reference page, so remember that, if the author is using the genre of the formal academic essay, then they do need all of those characteristics, but most of us are not writing these, community-driven proposals in the genre of a formal academic essay. In that case, all they need are the APA in-text citations and the APA formatted reference page. And again, we've provided a direct link to Purdue OWL's website. So you don't need to be an expert, but you should be able to quickly click on that link and compare and contrast your peers' in-text citations and the reference page to the examples provided, and to be able to point out any potential issues or misses that they may experience. All right, number 11. So this is where a lot of students end up missing points. The last question here, does the public service announcement or advocacy ad have the visual design and rhetorical characteristics of a PSA or advocacy ad? Be very specific. So when I say be very specific, what I mean by that is when you are looking at and responding to the visual design elements, you should cover each of these 4 elements: contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity. With the rhetorical characteristics, you should cover each of these: pathos, logos, and ethos. If you don't cover all of these aspects in your response, then it is not counted as a full response and you are not being very specific. So again, in Project 1, the peer review, what we try to do is we made it very explicit. We had contrast, repetition, alignment, and proximity on separate lines in order to encourage you to really respond to each one of those. Here, you should already have that idea, down. So what we're really trying to encourage you to do is use the information that you've learned through the Project 1 peer review and apply it into Project 2. But again, just to help you out, I wanted to really highlight this one thing that, again, a lot of students really miss. So you want to be very, very specific in this response. If it helps you to, add the different sections, contrast, repetition, alignment, proximity, pathos, logos, and ethos under this question, please do so. All right, so on question 15, and really as a response to any of these questions about the public service announcement or the advocacy ad, a lot of times, again, thinking back to Project 1, if the peer whose project you were reviewing did not have an infographic, what we ask you to do is to provide, some inspiration or suggestions for how they could translate the information from the written portion of their draft into the multimodal portion. Please do the same thing for Project 2. So don't just say, for all of these questions, no PSA or ad was attached. You will not earn credit for those questions if you do so. I need you to provide some suggestions, be helpful. Really, again, the point of peer reviews is to help out your classmates. So just say, well, this wasn't attached. That's not helpful. You're not doing any work there. So what I need you to do, if your peer does not have even a rough draft version of the PSA or an advocacy ad, is provide some suggestions or some inspiration on how those ideas might translate from the written portion into the multimodal portion of the draft. The last thing that I wanted to point out, I get a lot of questions on, when we talk about global issues. So in the composition world, global issues simply means the big ideas. So the things like genre, theme, audience, tone, those overarching concepts. That is in contrast to what we call local issues. Those are things like grammar, spelling, punctuation. The local issues a lot of times will show up in the rough draft. Again, the rough draft is you just getting your ideas onto paper. Through the revision process, a lot of those local issues get worked out. But the global issues are really where we need someone else to look at our project and tell us whether or not we're clearly communicating our ideas. So when we're talking about global issues, we're asking, outside of all of the questions that we've asked in this worksheet and any of the additional information you may have left on your peer's rough draft, are there any of these other big issues that the author needs to address in the revision? So I just wanted to provide that little bit of clarification, and hopefully that'll help you really round out the peer review feedback that you are providing to your classmates in order to really help them move forward into the revision process.